Hey, this is the Stronghold Digital Mining Daily Update. Today is Wednesday, August 2nd, 2023. So this is one of those episodes where there's just a lot of information. So let's kind of do a too long didn't watch summary right up front here. So if you're pressed for time, you can just get what you need to know and then bounce out. If you got some time and you want to see how I came up with this math, stick around because I'm inviting you to essentially sit next to me, look over my shoulder, and just sort of see in real time like how I computed these numbers, which are still kind of like preliminary. These aren't really my official estimates. Who knows if I'll ever come up with official estimates, so to speak, but I think this is a reasonable approximation of what we did in Q2 2023 in terms of revenue. So here are the numbers. On the low end, okay? In other words, I'd be surprised if our revenue were dramatically lower than about $20,948,179. So basically $20.9 million in terms of gross revenue for Stronghold Digital Mining in Q2 2023. That's kind of like on the lower end of the range. On the potentially higher end of the range, it would be $23,718,312. So say roughly $23.7 million on the higher end of the range. In terms of expenses, I'm not going to be surprised if our expenses were similar to what they were in Q1 2023, which were specifically $24,323,692. Those were Q1 2023 FOG expenses. I want to be really clear. Fuel, operations and maintenance, general and administrative. Okay, those are, that's money out of the bank, right? That's not like accounting gimmicks or depreciation or weird stuff like that. This is money that's leaving our checking account. So I'm not going to be surprised if our expenses were in that range, right? Say 24, 25 million. That said, I do think there is the potential that on the lower end, our expenses would have been closer to 19.5 million. So it's yet to be determined, what the exact numbers will be, but just, that's kind of what I'm coming up with. That's all that I'm going to really address in this part, right? If you stick around, I'll invite you to, again, just, sit next to me and look over my shoulder, and we can get into these numbers in a lot more detail. But basically, roughly, what did I say? 20.8 million on the low end, 20.9 million on the low end, right, of revenue, to say roughly 23.7 million on the high end for Q2 2023 revenue. That's the range that I kind of came up with. And when it comes to expenses, FOG expenses, right, 24, maybe 25 million, but the opportunity exists potentially to be maybe closer to like 19.5 or maybe 20 million. So, okay, so we're going to switch it up. You're going to kind of be sitting next to me now, so to speak, looking over my shoulder as we crunch the numbers, and I'll have a few final words to say once we're done doing that. Be forewarned, this is like almost like 30, 40 minutes. We really get into it. So, okay, here goes. And I thought I'd invite you to kind of sit beside me here and take a look at this data as well. And maybe you'll spot something that I've missed or omitted or have failed to take into consideration. So we're going to take a look at Q2 2023 core revenue. There may be typos in here. I mean, this is just like a scratch pad, essentially, okay? So when we look at our core input variables, up here we've got PJM, Penelec. This is average grid pricing for Q2 2023. I came up with $26.19. We've got PJM PP&L core revenue of, I should say average grid revenue, right, for the 90-day period of $22.97. Averaged together, that comes out to $24.58. So that's essentially the PJM average. So when we think about selling electricity to the grid, that is the revenue input that we're looking at. By contrast, here we have BTC MW, and I calculated that for Q2 2023 to be $79.98. again, these numbers, they can seem very precise in nature, but there are a lot of computations that go into determining these numbers. And let's assume that this is like a plus or minus 5 to 7%, you know what I mean? Because it's not, I'm not getting this, data directly from PJM or from Stronghold Digital Mining. I mean, well, to be clear, I'm getting, the PJM data that my homemade software collects every day. That does come from PJM. But what I'm pointing out is that I'm not getting these computations ultimately from PJM or Stronghold. It's just something that the dashboard computed based on a variety of variables, and it's kind of providing it in the way that it is. So hopefully this is within the range of accuracy. So in our Q1 2023 investor presentation, there was a section that specifically indicated that we were at 95 megawatts of current mining load. And then, I just added myself, hey, that's about 2.6 exahash a second at 36.58 joules per terahash. That's like the efficiency ratio. And basically, right, in our slide deck, it said moving to 130 megawatts by September 30th, 2023. By the way, this part right here, this is something I put in. This was not in the investor presentation. I just put it in here so that I could reference it, just for myself as I did the calculations, and for you, I suppose, right? If you're looking over my shoulder here, let me know if that all makes sense. So when we take the 95 megawatts of data center capacity, right? Our let's say mining load capacity, as we entered into, right? This is starting Q2 2023. This is kind of what we had, right? 95 megawatts. We multiply that by $79.98, which of course is our BTCMW number, times 24 hours a day, times 90 days and a quarter, and we get $16,411,896. Now, in addition to that revenue, we also need to take, we sort of and remember, right now we're just focusing on Bitcoin mining revenue. We need to take into consideration several purchases, right, that were, a combination of purchases and win-win hosting arrangements that were entered into. So the first of which would have been on May 15th when basically 2,000 Canaan Avalon 1246 Bitcoin mining machines were delivered and installed, right? To be clear, I think they were delivered early in May, but, we indicated, Stronghold Digital Mining indicated that May 15th would be sort of like the deadline by which we wanted to, get these machines up and running. So let's assume that, okay, yeah, we hit that target, which I believe we did. And so suddenly we have 2,000 Bitcoin mining machines that we need to devote additional electricity to energize and power, right? So when we do the math, it works out to basically, 6,840,000 watts, right, of electricity. And if you're wondering, well, hey, how did you actually come up with that number? So I did take a look at the spec sheet, the Canaan spec sheet for the Avalon 1246, and it indicated that this particular Bitcoin mining machine could produce 90 terahashes, so that's the 90 here, and it has an efficiency ratio of 38 joules per terahash, which really also kind of means like watts per terahash. So if we're looking at a calculator and we say, hey, let's take the number 38, and let's see how I did this. And then if we multiply that by 90, okay, that basically gives us 3,420 watts, right, per machine. So if we multiply 3,420 watts by 2,000 machines, we arrive at 6,840,000 watts. Otherwise, we could say, hey, 6.84 megawatts. All right, so what do we do next? Well, keep in mind, May 15th, that's essentially, say like the middle of the quarter, okay? You've got about 45 more days left in the quarter. 45 days, approximately, have already transpired. So here we're going to take 6.84 megawatts. We're going to multiply it by 65. Now, why 65 when we just said a moment ago that BTCMW was 79.98? See, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. And maybe it's just a little bit of intellectual laziness on my part, or perhaps I'm subconsciously preferring to be on the conservative side of these numbers. Basically, we revealed in the Q1 2023 investor presentation that the standard hosting arrangement that's typically out there is, hey, we basically... we collect $65 a megawatt hour, and we collect that from the company, right, for whom we're providing hosting services. Now, our win-win hosting plus arrangement is different, because not only does it allow us, meaning Stronghold Digital Mining, exposure to Bitcoin mining economics, right, in terms of like, hey, what if, price of Bitcoin and just the overall Bitcoin mining economic landscape improves, we have exposure to that. But as good partners, we also allow our win-win hosting plus partner to have, access to, grid sales. Like if we need to divert electricity to the grid, I believe the phraseology was, hey, we'll do a true up sort of, compensation of sorts. Again, this gets a little bit. It's not really complex per se, but you know what I mean. It can muddy the waters to a degree that I don't know is necessary, given what we're attempting to accomplish here. But this, the win-win hosting plus arrangement is really good for Canaan. It's phenomenal for Canaan, and it's really, really good for Stronghold Digital Mining, and that's what makes it a win-win hosting plus arrangement. Okay. But again, hey, let's just assume, hey, hey, worst case scenario, right? We're only going to collect $65 a megawatt hour, assuming, right, that the Bitcoin mining machines are operational because, Bitcoin mining economics make it reasonable for the machines to be running. And insofar as I could determine, there's no real reason to believe that these machines at any point, once they were installed, would not have been running, okay? So again, just, and you're welcome. Hey, if you want to kind of do the math and compute a slightly different number, I welcome that additional data. I think for my purposes, right, the way I'm attempting to approach this, hey, let's just multiply 6.84 megawatts by $65 a megawatt hour times 24 hours in a day by 45 days, which were left in the quarter. That basically provides us with $480,168 in revenue from these machines, okay? Pardon me. So as of June 1st, now this is where this gets a little bit tricky here. We're going to go ahead and make an assumption that an additional, again, to keep the math relatively clean, relatively, again, because bear in mind, I mean, despite my proximity to Panther Creek, it's not like I'm camped out there, right, with like a telephoto zoom lens or, some sort of quasi-military-esque drone hovering over the plant 24 hours a day, capturing every potential movement. I mean, I'm not, that's not really what this is about. But let's bear in mind that as of, May 31st, Stronghold Digital Mining mentioned, right, in a press release that we reached the 3 exahash, Bitcoin mining, sort of like capacity threshold. So let's, again, to try to keep the numbers somewhat rational, let's then think, hey, well, we started off at 2.6 exahash, right? That's at the very beginning of the quarter. We added about 200 petahash, right, on May 15th, and roughly another 200 petahash let's say June 1st, hey, 4 petahash added to 2.6 exahash basically gives you 3 exahash. So let's just sort of, come to the conclusion that as of June 1st, we had at least, 3 exahash of Bitcoin mining capacity. In fact, we can say that with certainty because there was a press release to that effect. So let's just sort of say then that these Canaan A1346s, were up and running June 1st. The deadline for them to be up and running was June 15th. Let's just say they're up June 1st. Okay. So essentially, we have a machine here that produces, say roughly 110 terahashes, right? And we've got 30 joules per terahash. We do the math like we did up here. We arrive at 6.6 million watts of electricity being used by these machines. That's basically 6.6 megawatts. So when we do the computation, 6.6 megawatts times $65 a megawatt hour times 24 hours in a day times 30 days, because bear in mind, it's June 1st now. There's only 30 days left in the quarter. Then we arrive at $308,880 in revenue from these machines. Finally, Stronghold Digital Mining purchased 5,000 micro BT WhatsMiner M50s. And that purchase was announced on April 21st, 2023. If I recall correctly, at the end of the month of May, these Bitcoin mining machines were on site, presumptively in the process of being installed, or at least, getting staged to be installed. So again, just for the sake of having a number to work with here, let's just assume for a moment that by June 15th, all 5,000 of these machines were installed. Okay. When we do the math, right, 28 joules per terahash, there's about 118 terahashes per machine, gives us 16,520,000 watts of electricity that will be used by these machines. That's basically 16.52 megawatts. So when we do the math, 16.52 megawatts times $79.98, which is BTCMW now, because remember, we own these Bitcoin mining machines ourselves, right? Times 24 hours in a day, times 15 days, because bear in mind, June 15th, right? Suddenly there's only 15 days left in the quarter. It gives us revenue of $475,657. Grand total, $17,676,601. Now, there are a couple things that I did not choose to take into consideration. Specifically, with regard to the MicroBT WhatsMiner M50s. I could have gone in and seen specifically for the 15 days, right, from June 15th, basically through June 30th, hey, what specifically was the average BTCMW number for those 15 days? Again, maybe chalk it up to being a little bit intellectually lazy, or just attempting to kind of plow through all these numbers in a somewhat timely manner. I simply just said, hey, you know what? If for the entire quarter the average was 79.98, let's just kind of assume it was that number for that 15-day period. And as I alluded to before, we have a win-win hosting plus arrangement. It's plausible we would have generated more than $65 a megawatt hour, right, in terms of the Canaan win-win hosting plus arrangement. But again, to be a little bit conservative and to just have a number to work with, let's just kind of go with $65 at the moment, okay? So $17,676,601. All right, now we got to take a look at grid revenue. So how do we do this? How do we figure out grid revenue? Well, all right, a couple ways we're going to do this. So when we think about the very beginning of the month, or the quarter, I should say, right? We had a current mining load of 95 megawatts. Stronghold Digital Mining between Scrubgrass and Panther Creek, let's call it 165 megawatts in cumulative nameplate capacity at both waste coal remediation facilities, right? 85 megawatts at Scrubgrass, 80 megawatts at Panther Creek, grand total 165 megawatts. That's how much electricity we could essentially produce at both places added together. When we subtract 95 megawatts, right, from 165 megawatts, that's how we arrive at this 70 megawatt number. So for the first 45 days of the quarter, we basically would do, 70 megawatts multiplied by $24.58, which is the grid average. Bear in mind, just as a quick refresher, remember we said, Penelec was 26.19, PP&L was 22.97, average of those out, 24.58. Okay. So when we do the math for the 45-day period using 70 megawatts as our benchmark, we have $1,858,248 in grid sale revenue. Now, beginning then on May 15th, we essentially subtract, right, the amount of electrical capacity, right, that would have previously been sold to the grid because we just didn't have the Bitcoin mining infrastructure to send any of that electricity to, right? So if we look up here, notice how it was 6.84 megawatts. Well, we need to energize that. So when we subtract 6.84 megawatts from 70, we hopefully, right, arrive at 63.16 megawatts. Multiply that now by the $24.58 by 24 hours in a day, by 15 days, right, from May 15th to June 1st, we arrive at $558,890. Now, beginning on June 1st, something happens, right? We indicated that, let's just go ahead and assume that the Canaan A1346s went online. So all of a sudden, we need to send more electricity to the data center, right? Because we have these phenomenal Canaan Bitcoin mining machines that we need to energize. So when we subtract the 6.6, right, from the 63.16, we arrive at 56.56 megawatts of electricity that's like left over after we've energized our data centers. So that then goes to the grid. So 56.56 multiplied by 24.58 times 24 hours in a day times 15 days, that's $500,488. Finally, we reach the final 15 days of the quarter, right? June 15th to June 30th. So what are we left with? Well, we're going to subtract 16.52 megawatts, which suddenly now we need to, we can't sell that 16.52 megawatts to the grid anymore because we need to energize the data center sufficiently to power these magnificent, micro BT WhatsMiner M50s. So when we subtract 16.52 megawatts from 56.56, you basically get 40 megawatts. There's I think it was like 40 point something or other, like a little bit of a rounding error type amount. Let's just call it 40 megawatts. So this is it. This is what we're left sending to the grid. 40 megawatts times $24.58 times 24 hours in a day times 15 days gives us $353,952. So that brings us to a grand total of $3,271,578 of grid revenue for Q2 2023. So let's go ahead and try to do the math here in real time. If we add, so let's just kind of take the original number, which is 17,676,601, right? That's going to be our, let's call it BTC revenue. And then we're going to add to that, let's see if I could scroll up a bit more with this. Okay, and we'll add to that our 3 million. Here, let's kind of be a little bit smarter about this. Go copy and paste. Okay, when we add those two numbers together, all right, let me do the math. If you're good at doing math in your head, that's awesome. I'm not so good at doing math in my head while speaking into a microphone. So let's just do this using a calculator. Thank heaven for calculators. So we're adding $17,676,601 to $3,271,578. And we arrive at, and we'll double check this number in a moment, $20,948,179. All right, let's just double check the math one last time here. 17,676,601 plus 3,271,578. Yeah, $20,948,179. Basically, Q1 2023 revenue was $17,266,215. So if we are preliminarily forecasting, right, or, sort of like thinking, hey, at least perhaps on the low end, right, Q2 2023 revenue was $20,948,179. That is an improvement in terms of total revenue from Q1. By the way, something that merits being mentioned is when we look at grid revenue, there was a period of time, I believe in late May of 2023, this year, where Panther Creek actually went offline, meaning the power plant was offline for maybe about 2 weeks or so for maintenance. So electricity was being imported from the grid instead of being sold to the grid for about a 2-week period of time from specifically Panther Creek. Again, all these numbers will probably, what I'm trying to get at, where the goal here isn't to get down, as close, to like, 20 cents of accuracy to the revenue number. It's to at least get a reasonably intelligent, explainable estimate that is within the range of possibility, to give us a ballpark sense of where we're at. So on the low end, let's go ahead and say, hey, maybe about 20 some odd $20 million in revenue. Now, what if, here, let's do it this way. So let's just sort of say estimated Q2 2023 revenue. All right, $20,948,179. Okay, and that's basically BTC plus grid. Okay. All right. So if this is our low end, what could potentially the high end of the range look like? Well, remember, we do sell beneficial use hash, and we're not including this in any models or really in any guidance, but hey, there's kind of like a whisper number out there that maybe we're doing about 250,000 a quarter in beneficial use hash sales. Again, assuming we were running the plants pretty much full time, which we already know that at least for 2 weeks in May, Panther Creek was not running, full time. The data center was still going, but the power plant itself was not. And we don't really know to what extent a lot of toggling took place between saying, hey, we're going to, not shut down the power plant, but let's say curtail some of the power generation and import power from the grid. Remember, the thing is, it takes about 12, maybe 8 to 12 hours or longer to reach full, full electrical generation capacity with these power plants. It's not as simple as saying, hey, we're generating electricity at, say 100 or say like 80, megawatts of electricity at Panther Creek. Hey, real quick here. Let's bring it down to like 30 megawatts. Okay, good. We did that like in, 45 seconds. Hey, let's go all the way back up to 80 again, and we'll do that in 10 seconds. From what I understand, right, the physics, right, the sort of like the mechanical engineering, you know, it doesn't quite work that way, right? The thermodynamics, I suppose, it's just not, that's not how these plants work. So my inclination is to believe we probably, again, very tricky to say this because this is a so-called shoulder month, right? Where ostensibly we would have presumably been maybe relying a little bit more on importing power from the grid. That's yet to be determined. Let's see, you know, what we find out. But I think for the purpose of this model, or for this, you know, estimate, you know, this kind of like scratch pad estimate, remember, this isn't really yet a formal, you know, kind of like prediction on my part or anything like that. I'm just kind of running through the numbers, you know, with you here, right? So that we can kind of both look at this, and, you know, you might be able to tell me, hey man, like you're missing something, or hey, you know, dig a little bit deeper in this section, or, you know, whatever the case may be. Again, you know, I appreciate having you here because, again, I think, you know, we get closer to some version of the truth when we work together. So let's just assume for a moment that we would have had these Bitcoin mining machines pretty much in place from the very beginning of the quarter, which we already know is not really true, but just to kind of account for some of the other nuances in terms of the Win-Win Hosting Plus arrangements and stuff like that. Like, hey, what if instead of 65, it was much higher than that? Okay, well, let's just, again, for the sake of, you know, scratch pad number here, let's see how much electricity would have been. Here, let's do the math. So, like, at the very end, we were basically only using about 40 megawatts for electricity, right? Selling it to the grid. So let's just do some quick math. Let's take 165 and subtract 40 megawatts from that. So that would kind of imply that 125 megawatts of electricity that's being generated by the power plants cumulatively would have perhaps gone to Bitcoin mining economics at a BTCMW price of $79.98. If we just did that, right? So let's kind of, let's see. Again, this is just to sort of like come up with a slightly different number. Let's just say 125 times the 79.98 times 24 hours in a day, right? Times 90 days in a quarter. What does that give us? Again, if you're good with doing math in your head, go for it. I am not quite that confident to do this both on camera and in my head while speaking. Times 90. Okay, so Bitcoin mining revenue in this situation would have been 21,594,600. Okay, so that's, you know, that's assuming we would have been running nonstop with 125 megawatts devoted to you know, Bitcoin mining, right, to energizing the data centers. So then let's also down here make the assumption that we were at 40 megawatts for, here, let's just do it like this. And instead of 15 days, let's say it would have been all 90 days of the quarter. So we'll say 40 million or 40 megawatts times 2458 times 24 hours in a day times 90 days in a quarter. That's 2.123 million. 23712. Whoops. Okay. So when we take our slightly revised upward 21 million, let's just do this sort of down here. Okay, so we have, let's see, that's BTC revenue high range number. Okay, plus we'll say, hey, this is going to be our new high range, so to speak. I mean, obviously it's lower than the previous number, but remember, we're doing a lot more, you know, Bitcoin mining in this other scenario. So, and this would be, say, the grid revenue right under this scenario. So if we add these together, then we get, okay, so then here we get estimated Q2 2023 revenue high range of, let's see, what do we get? Let's do the math here. So the $2,123,712 plus 21,594,600. All right, we'd get 23. Let's see, 23,718,312. Okay. So that would be our high end of the range. So what does this essentially mean? And let me just, hold on. Let me put in BTC plus grid just so that we have a better sense of what that is. Okay. All right. So if we look at this sort of like, you know, with a fresh perspective, we've got this 20,948,000 all the way to, say, 23.7 million. And we could call this Q2 2023 revenue estimate range. All right, that's, hey, look, it's an improvement over the 17.2 plus million, right, that we generated in Q1. But then we have fog, okay? Let me take a quick sip of water here. So we have to deal with the fog, right? That's an acronym I came up with that represents fuel, O&M, and G&A. In Q1 2023, added all together, it was $24,323,692. So these are the expenses that we can't really dodge, right? I mean, it's not like these are, like accounting numbers or numbers that aren't really cash intensive in the sense that, hey, it's just like numbers on the spreadsheet. It's not really like cash out of the bank. Yeah, no, these are, these numbers represent cash that leave our, so-called checking account, right? So, is it plausible that if we were toggling and importing power from the grid and running the power plants less, that our fuel expense would potentially be lower in Q2 2023? Okay, these are the questions we need to ask ourselves, right? O&M expenses, 8.4 million. I believe we are, generally speaking, guiding towards $2.5 to $3 million a month in O&M. I can certainly double check that, but just based on memory, that's kind of what we're talking about. So if we are at the lower end of that range, let's call it 2.5 million times 3 months in a quarter, that would be maybe we could get it down to 7.5 million. That being said, we did have an outage at Panther Creek, a scheduled outage, so there is a cost associated with annual plant maintenance. Now, Panther Creek just had this in May. Is Panther going to go down again in September? Maybe, right? Again, these are all the little unknowns that we need to grapple with. Okay, but presumably, plausibly, we could get O&M down to 7.5 million. But we have to keep in mind there is a cost to these, the plant downtime, anywhere from 2 to 4 million. Just based on the upgrades and enhancements and just routine maintenance that's taking place at the plant. So, again, we need to think of that. Now, when it comes to G&A, I know that we are guiding towards 20 million in annual G&A cash expenses. So the question then becomes, all right, that's interesting. So 20 million in a year, divide 20 million by 4 quarters in a year, and then you get $5 million per quarter. So in Q1 2023, we were up at 8.4 plus million. So is it possible that we could potentially have compressed G&A down to maybe closer to 5 million? And that's kind of a big deal, isn't it? Because when we look at our FOG expenses for Q1, I should probably specify this is Q1 2023 FOG expenses, right? this is kind of a material number, right? The 24 plus million, because when we look at our Q2 2023 revenue estimated range of between 20.9 million and perhaps 23.7 million, needless to say, right? You know, hey, again, these numbers, by the way, I mean, this is very challenging, right? Because, like, on the one hand, I think it's critical to realize that I'm not looking at these numbers from a negative standpoint and saying, oh, wow, this is terrible. No, not at all. I mean, the fact that we're galloping like onward and getting so much closer to closing that gap is just phenomenally positive. Okay, this is all in the context of, hey, are we going to have like decent news, good news, or great news? All right. I mean, you know, outside of something really unexpected, we're at the very least going to have some very decent news as it relates to our Q2 2023 results. So, you know, this is where then, hey, you know, if we subtract roughly, here, let's just do some quick math here. Let's say for a moment this is closer to 5 million. All right, let's kind of denote it as being 5 million. O&M, I'm just going to leave the way it is, only again because we did have the Panther Creek outage. That there's a cost involved with that. So let's just assume for a second O&M stays at around 8.4 million. I mean, heck, we could even just say maybe it bounces up to 9 million. Okay. When we look at fuel expense, can that number be a little bit lower? You know, that's a really great question. I don't think it would be necessarily, unless we really aggressively curtailed power production at the plants and imported a lot of power during Q2 2023. If we did that, maybe this number gets shaved down to closer to 5.5 million. Again, this is just, rough sketch number crunching here. So altogether, 5.5 million plus 9 million for O&M plus 5 million for, G&A. Suddenly, down here, we might get, boy, I know this is very low tech the way I'm doing this. We might get a number that approaches closer to 19.5 million in FOG expenses. So under that circumstance, right, suddenly, hey, our revenue, even at the low end, let's say 20.9 million, is higher than our FOG expenses, assuming we were able to compress expenses in some of the ways I just described in this quick demo here, right? But at the end of the day, as I've said before, Stronghold Digital Mining, it's a gamble, it's a bet, it's a calculated gamble, a very strategic bet on Bitcoin mining economics improving and our revenue, really galloping forward from where we're at right now. So this is the, sort of like back of the envelope, scratch pad numbers. This is what they look like, at least preliminarily. I'm going to want to go back and maybe double check a couple things, but let me know what you think. I mean, this is why I've invited you to join me, right? Because a lot of times when we put our minds together, we can oftentimes come up with something that's a bit closer to reality. Okay, that was a lot. Hey, in fairness, don't complain. I warned you. I gave you all the information ahead of time, right? But listen, to the extent you chose to hang out and, kind of look over my shoulder as we did the math together, as we worked through the numbers, that's awesome. Hopefully you found my math to be relatively accurate, but I am curious to hear what you have to say in the comments below. where did I go wrong with the math? Hey, how can we improve the numbers? Remember, this is a collaborative effort, right? This is a community effort. Hey, we're co-owners of this business. We're shareholders in this business. These numbers are really important to the health and wellness of this business, right? So I welcome your feedback and input as to what these numbers might perhaps look like. But otherwise, hey, let's be positive, let's be great, and we'll see each other again tomorrow.